lucky to have them here tonight. So without further ado, let's welcome Pip Tomke here tonight.
Okay, so I'm going to speak into the microphone because I have an accent and I bit my tongue this morning eating breakfast, so I have a little bit of a problem. So I was just talking to Wesley about this, which is that one of the most valuable things when I was studying as a student was all the lectures that I went to, and just hearing other people provide insights into their process, and moments of inspiration. So I really hope that today what I'm going to talk about provides a little bit. I can give a little bit back on that front. So my presentation today is going to be in two parts. The first part is, I think, a little bit my journey, my story, and why I got to my approach to design. And then the second part is it's an introduction to my studio and some of the work that we've done, and I'll tell just a few brief stories about that. And then hopefully at the end, if anybody has any questions, we'll have some time to, I can field some questions. So, no further ado. So, when I first started studying industrial design, I should say I have 2 degrees in industrial design. I have a BA from Newcastle, which is in the northern part of England. It was a really remarkable time for the college. We had, I think, because there was a lot of really interesting students that came through. One of them was Jonathan Ives. He was a few years ahead of me, and then I went on to study my master's at the Royal College of Art. But the one question that I really struggled with as an industrial designer, especially when I first started studying industrial design at Newcastle, was what on earth qualifies somebody to be an industrial designer or to be a designer? And this is the way that I viewed the problem, and I'm sure many of you have thought about this, but I tried to simplify it. So the problem is as a designer, is that when you start to think about what you are going to design, like if I was going to design a chair, for instance, and I think about designing a chair for myself, it is an incredibly difficult task, I would think, because I have, like I said, I have some design education. I have fairly large expectations about the products that I purchase. So designing a product for myself is of course quite difficult. So then, of course, designing a product. So it gets to work. So designing a product, of course, for therefore myself and then somebody else, for instance, like a partner or a friend, you have in essence kind of doubled the problem. And now you have it's a lot more of a tricky problem, because now, for instance, like in this example here, you have a gender issue. You may have cultural, different background, different cultural issues or differences or demands on whatever you're going to purchase. So of course, then the story goes on, which is of course, if you're to start to design for your friends and your family, the problem gets more and more complicated, and so on, and then of course, you have people with different ages, and you have people with disabilities, and so designing for hundreds of people and then maybe thousands of people. How on earth do you design a product for thousands of people? So the premise of my talk is surrounding this one question right here, which is, so how is it possible to design a product for 800,000 people who live in a different country with no market research in 2 weeks? And this was a problem that I faced probably about 10 years ago. And it fed into, I think, an idea or a narrative that I've been exploring for a long time. So again, when I was at the RCA, at the Royal College of Art, where I did my master's, I came across this book. And the book is called How Buildings Learn. Now, I recommend absolutely everybody here reading this book. If actually the best way to to look at this is there's actually a BBC. It's on YouTube. It's free. I think it's into like 4 or 5 parts, but it's a book by Stuart Brand, and it's on architecture, and it's phenomenal. And because it asks this one question, which is that why on earth are there some buildings that last the test of time, and why are there other buildings which don't? And so Stuart Brand looks at a whole series of different types of buildings, I think we have here like retail and commercial and residential and buildings in different parts of the land, built from different materials, etc. But the one thing that I took from Stuart Brand's book was that when he had a little bit of a kind of synopsis was that on the conclusion is that he seemed to focus on the fact that, or came to the conclusion, which is that warehouses were one of the most amazing buildings there were, and they last the test of time. And the reason being, which is that, of course, that warehouses are very, very adaptable buildings, which is that they're really designed without knowing exactly what the function of the building truly is. And when you don't know really truly what the function of something is or how it's going to be used, because of course in a warehouse you may have boxes coming in and out, but you don't know what size the boxes are, you don't know how many boxes there are going to be, and sometimes they're not boxes, sometimes they're other things. So the point being, which is that when you design a warehouse, it has to be this incredibly versatile structure. And as a result of it being such a versatile structure, it means that warehouses, as they grow older, sometimes if an area changes and now it needs to become residential, the warehouse can easily become residential, or it can become it can go into being commercial, etc. And so it's a very interesting structure. And I saw this and I was like, how can this be applied to? How can this theory be applied to industrial design? So, or the products that I'm working on. So, one of the things that I learned from it was that, if you, the way you look at design, and I think there's testament to this when you look at the history, especially in architecture, of buildings where people have done something that is very, very specific. And I think that, listen, like I was talking about right there, that when you're designing something which is like a residence, you definitely design in where the kitchen is, the hallways, the bedrooms, etc. And it becomes a very, very certain type of structure. And then you can get even deeper into it, like if you were to, for instance, if you were a modernist, for instance. And so Le Corbusier, when you looked at some of his projects that he did in northern France, you'd realize, which is, you'll see there are great documentaries and books on the fact how they failed. And one of the reasons that they failed is that because, Le Corbusier, not only was trying to design these buildings and these structures for people to live in, there was this whole idea of the machine to live in was, all the ideas that he spawned. But it was the fact that also he was trying to dictate also how people interacted with the design, how people interacted with the architecture, etc. So he was really dictating how people should live. And so if you have a look at a lot of those buildings today, apart from a few people who have bought those buildings and kind of lived this lifestyle, to a large extent, the buildings failed. And you'd see that people started putting up curtains, put in their own French furniture, and the whole thing, there was no longer these kind of modernist masterpieces. And I think that somewhat when you start to customize such clean modernism, it looks kind of worse than the other types of architecture. Anyway, so to come to this point here, which is that I think one of the most interesting points is and way I view design, and it's something that Stuart Brand touches on, is the fact that we have to be very, very careful about how we view ourselves as designers. And the point being, which is that I think that we are we're like creative midwives. And when I say midwife, I mean the nurse that, I don't know if it's the same in English, it's the nurse that gives birth to the baby. And the point being, which is this is, I think, is exactly where we are in the process of developing products or design solutions. The point being, which is that the midwife helps and brings the child into the world in the best way possible. But after that, the child just goes on their way and they become a Nobel Prize winner, or they can they can be, they can go to jail, they can be, but the point being, which is the midwife themselves doesn't really have much control over the life of the child. It is the job of the midwife to just bring the child into the world in the best way possible. And when you start to think about design like this, you start to realize, which is that if we are designing children, then we really have to think very, very hard about all of the changes that's going to happen in that child or that product's life, and of course adapting it to as many situations as possible. So there's a point, especially in my process or the way that I view this, which is that there's an awful lot that we don't know about design and about the life of the product. Anyway, so back to the original question, which is, of course, how do you design a product, for 800,000 people in 2 weeks with little information? So the result that I came across was so when I was studying my master's, I really dived into this particular problem to try and find something within product design or something that I could apply to products, which was basically a little bit similar to what warehouses were in the Stuart Brand book of trying to create something which was purely adaptable. So the result of my research, or I should say my study, was this, which is the whole. And the idea being, which is that I realized that with architecture, there's a definite inverse between the difference between product design and architecture. Whereas a lot of the time with architecture, you're thinking about how the structure goes around you. Whereas with products, you're more thinking about how you interact with the product from the outside in. So anyway, there's an element of scale that I was dealing with, and so the whole was this idea, which was that I could perhaps, if I was to put holes into things without the actual idea of I don't know how people would use the hole or care to use the hole. There was this idea that if I started to play around with holes, then perhaps put holes into products, it'd be an interesting experiment to see exactly how products would adapt. And maybe this would be some kind of some tool that they could use to adapt. So anyway, so of course, the hole is used very, very heavily, and there's some very good examples of kind of like closed loops or holes in the world with boats and bags, which is the idea that especially if you've been on a boat, there's lots of kind of areas in which is if you get into any kind of trouble at all, there are all sorts of loops and things to be able to get you out of trouble. And the same goes with bags, as they're kind of scalable. So anyway, so for a good part of my career, unknown to many of my clients and the people I've designed products for, I've been sticking holes in things for a long, long time. So we're going to have a look at some of them. So, but the first one is was a coat. I was asked to do a coat hanger for. This was a company in London that was bought by Herman Miller. And this was sold in a whole series of boutiques all around Europe. But this one is I think, the purest form of the whole experiment I ever did. So they asked me to do a coat hanger. But I had this idea, of course, which was that, well, first of all, the concept itself is just simply a whole bunch of holes stuck together with a couple of bumps on it. That's all it is. But the pitch, of course, I have to pitch things in different ways so they produce my ideas. But the actual pitch was that, of course, was that there was a change in the way that people were becoming less formal and with their kind of daily lives. So there was this idea that maybe not having a less formal way of hanging your clothes and your garments and all the different types of garments that you have, like, because if you have umbrellas, if you have hats, this is a device or an object or a piece of furniture which you could hang onto a wall in any orientation, and it would be able to kind of adapt to your life. And that's the key to it right there, which is that designing products, of course, which adapt to our lives. So this one here was, it was the purest form. It was, and it's very nice also if you put a whole bunch of these together. The second one is this product I did for Nokia. This was sold through Verizon, and they simply came up with they wanted this was prior to the iPhone, and they wanted a texting device, and it was just kind of on the fringe of phones becoming smart. But again, it was another opportunity for me to put a hole into it. Now, putting holes into phones is very, very difficult. And you'll see that there are other examples where, of course, it's a lot easier for sure. Because the reason being was just there's a whole bunch of electronics, there's antennas, there's all sorts of things in there, and they tend to make them bigger and fatter. So you have to work very, very hard to keep that all in check. But the point here again was that when I designed this, people would ask me, "Hey Pip, what is the hole for?" And of course, I show it here with a pencil, and I talked about, you could put a chopstick through it. And the way that I presented this, of course, is the fact that a lot of people wanted to always check their messages and always wanted to be connected. And there's a problem with the fact is that it's best to have, it'd be nice to have a stand on your phone, but perhaps we use this kind of ad hoc way of you use a found object as a stand as opposed to actually designing the stand into it. So I spoke heavily about that, which allowed me to get this design made. But the reality of it was another whole experiment, which they didn't realize. And so the main the main point of this is, and because I would have never got away saying this, which is that if they ask me, Pip, what's the hole for? I'd say I don't know and I don't really care. It's for the point which is that it allows the product to adapt to the person. Anyway. Show some more examples of some holes I put into some things. So the top left is it's a box for Polycom. It's like a server. The next one across is a device you put into your car. It jump starts your car, but of course the loop. So it has like a thing that plugs into your cigarette lighter to jumpstart your car. This is for a Scandinavian company, but the loop, when it's finished, forms a hole. There's some mobile phone accessory here. This right one here is a balance bike for children. And it's really funny that when you start to put holes into things, they really do definitely start to elevate the product and give it new meaning, new purpose, new function. So the hole here is actually on the back of the seat. So the way that I pitched it there was, of course, it helps the parent balance the child and guide the child when they're learning how to balance on the bike. And it also allows them to easily grab it and throw it into the back of the car if they're going somewhere. But the reality is it's just a hole, and I don't know what it's for. Going from the middle there, so Formac display. Actually, last time I don't know if anyone was here last time. I got asked this question last time I was here with my partner who did a talk, and this one was the client gave us this brief here. This was a company that did Mac accessories, and they wanted to do a Mac screen. This was a huge selling Mac alternative display back from 2000, and the brief I was given there was it needed to be Mac-like but not Mac-like. One of the most difficult briefs I've ever had. But anyway, so there's a gaming controller. This is a case for a cell phone manufacturer, a camera. There's a speaker down there. This bottom left one has a little bit of a funny story behind it because it's for Vizio, a local company, and the head of design there was kind of on to the fact that I put holes in everything. So he gave me this. He gave us this speaker, and he said, "Pip, I'm going to give you this speaker, and I want you to design it. I know you can do something very nice with it, but I don't want you to put a hole in it." So I said, "Okay, I won't put a hole in it." And so I put a handle on it, which is, of course. So anyway, so then the next one it was a laptop stand for Knoll International. And then this is the bottom of a flashlight, and I've got this one here is a jewelry tree, but I've got there's some holes for the bird's eyes that could be used for earrings, or it could be used for something else. So anyway, so to come back to the original question, which is that how is it possible to build a product for 800,000 people who live in a different country with no market research in 2 weeks? And so just to put context around this, which is this happened to me, and it was a really frightening project because it was a cell phone, and and so it was big business, and they wanted to sell 800,000 units to come up. It was to stave off competition from Samsung and LG and Motorola at the time. The phone was to go into Indonesia. There was no time to develop it, and I had never been to Indonesia. So this is the solution. And so this is the, I always forget the numbers for the Nokia phones I've designed, but this one here is, I think it's the 2208, and it was a very, very simple candy bar phone with a camera on the back of it. But of course, I put this hole into the corner here. And kind of a little unknown to me was the fact that there was a massive trend. And so this phone went into Indonesia and also went into China. And there was a massive trend of customizing customizing the phones. And this was back in 2007, I think it was, 2006, 2007, of people hanging all these like trinkets off their phones. And so they used to have like this little lanyard detail. It's like a really itty-bitty hook, and people would hang things off there. So unknown to me, this was a massive trend. I put the hole into it, and as a result, people went crazy with this phone, because now you didn't have to hang just a few, or one or two of those kind of little trinkets off it. You could hang hundreds off it. Yeah. I have to say before I move on though, because putting a hole into this one was the most difficult one yet, because it was a very, very small. This is a very, very small phone. It looks, and the area here where I put the hole is exactly where the antennas need to go. And this was a CDMA device, which meant that it had a very, very large antenna, a very, very complicated antenna. And the other thing about it was that I came across this law, which I didn't realize, which is that it's a very good law, which means that if you can't really have electronic devices with a loop on them, that if a child falls down the stairs and this gets caught in the stairs, that it causes any harm or even hangs anybody. So there needs to be a breaking strain on elements that you design in if you're going to put a loop or a strap around. So this actual device, I found this law, and it's like, oh gosh. So actually designed in here, which not a lot of people know, is there's actually there's a hinge in here, and there's a breaking point here. So I think it's like at 35 pounds. The whole thing just like breaks apart, but it kind of opens around this. So there's a fairly complicated mechanism around this hole to make the hole. But anyway, but the remarkable thing about putting a hole into this product was that the result was that it didn't sell 800,000 units. It sold 28 million units worldwide in the space of 3 years. So I think that there's this testament to the fact, which is that when we are designing elements or designing things, we have to really think very, very hard. And phones and things which we produce at this type of scale, 28 million, it's very, very hard. I mean, it's not to say that I'm trying to I think that design research is incredibly important. And we also always do design research, and do as much design research as possible, do insight research, do quantitative research. We do all of that at my studio. But the result at the end of the day is that when you design for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, these are all individual people. And they all have different tastes. They all gone their own pathway through life. And so it's very, very hard to put them into categories. So the one thing that we do, and this is what we talk about in the studio, is the whole thinking or adaptive design. It's this idea which is that, or acknowledging as designers that we don't know the answer to the problem. And when you admit the fact that you just don't know the answer, this feels like therapy, but when you feel like you don't know the answer to the problem, it puts you on a different trajectory when you start to design things. Because you really have to bear in mind that you are, again, like designing for 28 million individuals and from all around the world. So trying to design something in there which isn't just you trying to express yourself, but you trying to allow the product adapt to people's lives, I think is incredibly important and leads to very, very successful products. So why is this so important? So And then and so at my studio, I should talk about the fact that my studio has I'll get a little bit more into this in a second, but we're always trying to question ourselves, question why we do things, try things, make things better. But we definitely have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to our children, and to the world. Another thing that we talk about in the studio is the ERS. And then again, it's part of the whole and adaptive thinking, which is we have people who come in, and a lot of the clients that come in, especially business people that are looking at their product range right now, and they'll say, "Hey, Pip, can you make our next product faster, slimmer, cheaper?" All these words that end in And the problem is that all those words that end in they're not thinking about the individual. They're just thinking about how I can just take this product and I can just make it cheaper, faster, slimmer. And it's a very, very simple, and it's not a very large step to take, and it doesn't account for people. It's not a very human approach. So we try to move them away from the ERS so that we can do some more progressive thinking, and as a result of it, some of the products we do, we try to get them to change paradigms and really question exactly why products exist and how we can truly improve them. And the other reason why that is so important, and we live by this phrase, which is taking no risk is the biggest risk, because we have to today, there is so much competition, and there's so many poor products out there, and so many poorly conceived products, that we really have to just start to take bigger steps and bigger risks to try and change the world. And the reason why is because we have to make fewer, better things. And this is something else that we think is very, very important. And the reality of it is, and the reason why, is that, and I recommend everybody doing this, because it's just a simple, free field trip. But it's to just call one of your local recycling facilities or garbage management facilities and just go and do a tour. We did that. We've done that a few times. And it is a truly, truly shocking experience, because we talk about recycling, and it is a very, very poor state of affairs. And it's remarkable when you go to one of these facilities and you just see how much stuff each day is thrown away. And the majority of that stuff, I'm talking about like 90% of it, just goes into landfill. And the problem is with recycling, I don't know if anyone has looked into recycling, but if you try to, as a designer, look at recycling products, it is an incredibly difficult task, because like if you want to make something which is white, then really the only way you can get recycled materials, you have to source white products to be able to chop down and then put those into the hopper and go through the process to make your white. Because the reality of it is that actually majority of recycled materials tend to be black, because when you put it all together, it just becomes black. So outside of that, it kind of limits what you can do. It also limits the properties of the plastic. So recycling really is, I think, is a very, very poor excuse, when really we should be designing products from the start which last longer. And as we say, make better products and fewer better things. So anyway, that's kind of the end of my first part, where I've just talked a little bit about the whole thinking and some of the adaptive design. The next bit is wanted to just like introduce you a little bit to my studio and some of the projects that we've done. So my studio is just next to LAX, near the beach in El Segundo. We designed and built this facility. It's an old warehouse that we've converted into a studio. The studio itself is actually built a little bit on a dream of mine, which is that I've worked with many organizations, many consultancies, corporations, and like I picked up a lot of things of what I thought were the best practices. And so what this studio is it's an idea for, I think, some of those ideas and best practices to come together. And so some of the best practices or ideas that we utilize are, for instance, we have, I should introduce the team at this point. So there we all are. And there's a few other people now. But some of the ideas and practices that we have, which is that absolutely nobody in this company, I shouldn't say my company because it really is, I don't see it as that, it's a studio, is everybody, there's a equal number of males to females. There are no titles in the company at all, and I include myself in that. I mean, some people always say that I'm of course my name's on the door, but really everyone at the studio knows that no one ever calls me boss or anything. I'm just Pip. And the reason being, which is that we don't want any type of hierarchy at all, because when you're running a creative company, you really want, I understand, which is the idea can come from absolutely anywhere. And I want the idea to come from anywhere. I don't want anything to, any politics to stifle that type of thinking, or someone not have the confidence to stand up. I don't know if anybody is, I'm going to remember the name of this book. No, the story of Pixar. I forget the name of that book. There's a really fantastic part of the book which talks about a creativity Inc. There's a really wonderful part of the book where they talk about the fact that Steve Jobs had this like conference room made, and it has this very, very long table, and it was this architecture. It was this beautiful, beautiful room. And what happened was, of course, is that the top people of the company kind of Pixar would sit in the middle, and then the next people would sit out. And then as the company grew, people started to sit around the outside. But what they didn't realize that they were creating some kind of hierarchy system. And then one day, they didn't realize this until one day when that room something had to happen in that room, and they had to shift to another room which had a circular table. And everyone sat around, and suddenly all of it had all the kind of the hierarchy had dissipated, and all sorts of people were just throwing in ideas. So they scrapped that room and instantly moved to this circular. But there's something which is about social dynamics, especially within a creative team, which you have to, which is different, I think, from the majority of organizations. So we try very, very hard to create this really interesting environment. Everyone has, so the other thing is that about my team is that to work in the team, we look for people who have lived, worked, or studied in another country. The reason being, which is that the collection of people you see here, they aren't necessarily all hired. I say hired, but I talk about them as a collective, just people I really enjoy working with. But they're not hired just purely on just like killer design skills. They are all killer designers, but the reality is that what I really look for is personality. I look for people I can sit next to at 4 o'clock in the morning and still be happy. I also look for people who have something to say, have an opinion. I look for people who have had an experience in a true experience in their life. There's a really fantastic talk by Tom Peters about how he would prefer to hire somebody who'd not someone who'd graduated top of their class, but someone who'd traveled the world, because, as he puts it, crazy times call for crazy people. And there was this idea, which is that there are certain people. If someone had, at the age of 18, instead of going to university, said to their parents, "Hey, you know what? I'm just going to travel around the world," and their parents, of course, want them to go to college. But the fact is that he said, every time I speak to someone who has come back from traveling around the world and said, "How good was that decision?" they'll say, "It's the best decision I ever made." And he says, and it's true that in today, which is that, like I said earlier on, that it's we really have to take bigger risks. Is the fact is that we have, like Tom Peters says, he wants those people to just make that same decision again, take a really big risk, which may be zigging when everyone else is zagging, that sort of thing, but take that risk for them. So the people that you see here are people who I look for that particular quality in when looking to come from someone from the studio. So we have a very, very really interesting and mixed group of people with all sorts of different experiences. But anyway, so the idea being, which is that, again, like I say, I like the idea that when I go to work every day, I go and I meet with these people, and we'll always come up with an interesting new perspective on a product. Anyway, besides that, I'll get into, I don't know if people have seen some of the work that we've done, but I'll just talk through a few examples. This was a really big product that came out just over a year ago. I think this has won pretty much every design award in the world. So it's called the Trio, I think it is, the Polycom Trio. And what it is it's a conference foam for it's a conferencing phone. Well, that's what the brief was. They wanted a new conferencing phone, but the reality of it is that this is something completely different. So we had to create a new form language. We wanted something very, very distinctive and unique because there was growing competition in this area. But the reality is that when we started to have a look at this particular area, we wanted to take, again, a big step, a bold step. And so we said we had to take complete control of the entire enterprise room and space. So what this is it's not necessarily really a conferencing phone, which is what everyone else was making, but it's more of a smart hub that can completely control all of your business needs within a conference room. But of course, at the same time, it has fantastic speakers and microphones, which we had to work around, so you can have this really amazing kind of conferencing room experience. This is a product we did for Belkin. It's sold in the Apple Store. It was the first. It's an Apple Watch charger and phone charger, and they had this. And the real challenge with this project, when Belkin came to us, was that they said, this was designed before the watch came out. So they said the watch is coming out, we need to design a charger for it. So of course our question is that what does the watch look like? And they said they don't know. So we had to, so that was kind of a rich unknown for us to design around. And of course they wanted it to come out pretty much the exact same time as the watch as well. So, when we did some early concepts on this, we had to collaborate with Apple to try and get, to align this. And I think the line is up there, which is that Apple had said that this was the most beautiful accessory they had ever seen. And it's testament to the fact, which is that there's this, I don't know if anyone has seen this product up close, but it's very heavy and it's all made from metals. But the bar which supports the phone and the watch was a real challenge because it has a cable running up the inside of it, but it's a zinc part which is then plated, but it was incredibly complicated working with the manufacturers to try and get this puck and this cabling to work. And this was the first device also to have to be sold with an integrated puck. I don't know how many are sold like that now. We've done a lot of work with Vizio. This is, I think this product just came out a couple of months ago, and it's like a competitor to, well, a little bit more of a versatile solution like Sonos, where you can dot these around your house. But unlike Sonos, it's not a closed system. It simply works off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. But one of the things that we did here was try to up the kind of interaction. So the entire top surfaces of these devices, you can control your experience. You can control the device which is driving it through some just simple gestures. It has a very, very nice experience. We worked very, very hard to work on the experience with that project. So the story behind this one, and this is one of the few products which I can ever tell this story about. So when we present products, when we present concepts, when a client comes to us and says, "Hey Pip, can you design something for us?" Usually, again, they approach us with the kind of the ers, which is they want something which is a very, very small baby step. Their entire marketing team and business team have identified, like, if we just take this little step here, and just beat the competition, it'll be good business for us. But what we tend to do is that, and especially within the world of technology, which is always moving so fast, and of course, when we start sketching on something, it's going to be hitting the shelves in 8-10 months' time. So you've got to be ahead of the game in 8 and 10 months' time. So anyway, so what we tend to do, and what we pretty much always do, is we do the mild to wild approach to design concepting, which is that when a client comes in, we'll present the first, we'll present like 5 concepts, for instance, and the first one will be very, very mild. And it's usually that particular concept is exactly what they've asked for. But then, of course, we then present, they slowly get slowly wilder. But the point being, which is that we have a responsibility to not only the client, but also, I think, to, again, trying to push the technology and push the product and push ourselves as part of this process. And when I talk about going wild, I don't talk about being conceptual. I talk about there's something which is grounded in reality, but it may be in an area, or there may be something about the product which is not what they expected, and we push it into maybe a different market or we see a new developing technology that we need to harness to advance this product. But the reality is, and and I'd say that like 90% of the time, clients, when they look at this, they suddenly realize, of course, when we do the MARD one, and we go on, they instantly can see that look on their face like, oh gosh, yes, we were really kind of very conservative with our thinking about this. This one's a lot better. And then slowly you get to show the next one, they're like, oh, that's even better, I can't believe it. And so it keeps on going on like this. But then usually when you get to the really wild one, they get really kind of like nervous because this is really kind of putting it out there. But the point of the really wild one, we've come to realize, is that we have to, they generally, 90% of the time, always land somewhere in the middle, concept number 3. So depending on how wild the further concept is that we can stretch exactly, knowing where they're going to land. We can somewhat orchestrate the presentation to help them and steer them to landing on the right concept. But it's a long-winded way of saying that actually this project, this was the wild one. The guy just went, yeah, that's it, let's do it. And it kind of shocked us all because we weren't expecting it. Because simply what they wanted was a gaming controller, excuse me, for children. And this is sold in Europe, and I think it's just entering into the United States for a company called PlayJam. And what it simply is you put a little dongle into the side of your TV, and it's like Chromecast, but it does games, which mean the games are aimed at like educating your children as opposed to kind of Xbox really rich games that take days to complete. So these kind of quick games, more like iPad games and educational games. But it's a very, very simple, easy way to deploy. And so it has this this controller, this wireless controller. The body here is the charger. So this is the controller is the head, and the body is the charger, and then there's a dongle. But the reason why this looks like it does, so first of all, they hadn't identified, well, they knew they were going for children, but they were just looking at something which was kind of like abstract and kind of usual kind of gaming type controller. So this caught them completely off guard. But the reason why we did this was that they wanted to constantly, they'd asked us to understand how they could constantly stimulate the market, and also if they wanted to do different colors, how they could deal with inventory. Now this is a really big problem in design, which is that if you start to, as soon as you create a different SKU or a different color, sometimes those colors don't sell, etc., and you're left with inventory. Sometimes that gets returned to you. It's a huge cost. So we came up with this concept, and simply what it is that this is just one controller, or I should say one monster, and there's a whole bunch of these. And the idea being that they would sell these one at a time for a very, very short period, and they were collectibles. And as soon as you'd stop making one, we'd just move on to the next one, et cetera, to try and get some buzz going on eBay and after sales, and create some kind of cult type following around these products. But it was a way of approaching like the issue of different SKUs and making sure that they weren't left with any inventory. So it was a kind of when we were designing around this was a kind of us designing around the logistics of the project. Just to show something about a little bit of different scale, we do some very, very large scale projects as well. This one is a full immersive room. This is like $1 million room, and the idea is that large corporations, they will buy several of these $1 million rooms, and when you connect $1 million room to the other $1 million room, you get this like very seamless experience because we've set up all of the speakers, the cameras, and everything. It's almost like a film studio, and so when you look at the displays, it doesn't seem, it seems hard. I don't know if anyone's used one of these, but this is like the cream of the cream, this one. And so when you look at those displays, you really feel like you're just looking through windows at a room on the other side of the wall, because the acoustics and everything is, we're able to develop and design. But this was another incredibly complicated project, because this entire room, and it was another project where we kind of had to design around logistics. The entire room had to be deployed so that if you bought this room, it could be set up anywhere in the world in 2 weeks. And that is a crazy proposition, because what that means is that the entire room has to be broken down into sizes which can go into the hull of an aircraft, can fit into an elevator of a skyscraper. Also has to be able to adjust for going into a 18th century office building in London. it's incredibly complicated. And not only that, but it had to be homologated for all of the different electrical needs of all the different countries. So it's a remarkably complicated, kind of almost architectural problem, but a really fascinating challenge. And it comes in a whole variety of colors as well. The last two, I'll come back to the last two here. So this one here is actually, this product here is actually being launched this evening. And this is a very, very special project for us. So there's a really remarkable artist. It's like a sculptor, abstract conceptual artist here in Los Angeles called Michael Kalish. And he does these these huge installations. And he was interested in collaborating on a project with us. And so he came to us and he said, I want to kind of like understand, investigate the boundaries between art and design, and art and making products and design. So he had this idea, which is explore the idea of finding love. And if you have a look at his work, he did this remarkable thing, which is like this thing that's called Muhammad Ali. They had it at the Staples Center. It's about the same size as this room, and it's all these boxing balls which are hung, and then when you get to a certain point, suddenly you see the face of Muhammad Ali. You should look it up on YouTube. It's absolutely incredible. So he does all this stuff, which is kind of about So I don't know if you saw it had like the candlesticks on the end here, and it has like another kind of a vessel on the end there, which you can hang, which you can poke flowers into. So anyway, it was a really truly remarkable project, and very different from all the other large projects that we've been working on. So the final project is. It's one that we've actually launched our own brand as well. This is us kind of like practicing what we preach. And we do an awful lot of work into looking at different types of social groups and decided to put some of that research into play and create our own product. So this got launched at the end of last year. It's called Double Cross. And what it is it's just simply a game. I don't know if people are familiar with this Liar's Dice game. I became introduced to this I was on a factory trip to China, and everybody was playing it. And it's just simply this game of you have all these cups and dice, and you go around. But anyway, I absolutely loved this game. And so when I came back, I tried to find it, and it was very, very difficult. And I found one product, but it was really poorly designed. It was just a simple set of cups and some dice. So I thought it was an opportunity for us to do something in this particular area. But the one thing we've tried to do here, which is a little bit different, is that we've tried to make something which we're calling as kind of functional decor, which is this idea, which is that in a world where everybody is turning to their cell phones and their tablets, and there's kind of a breakdown in true social interaction, is this idea that I think gameplay is still really vital. And so there's this idea, but how do you encourage people to play games? And the problem is that games currently, the majority of them, once you've played them, they're in these cardboard boxes and you just stuff them in a cupboard. So there's this idea, which is that if we were to make it into something different that people would leave out and became an object that could become decor, then perhaps people would be reminded to play the game. And so that is simply what it is. And we approached it with all of the values that we've been building in it. And like I say, my studio it's just a whole series of experiments, and everybody is trying to have an idea and have some experiments we'd like to pursue. And this is kind of like a collection of those experiments to see what we could do to make a product that was environmental and became something which was, if we're going to do a game that was richer, that people, in the kind of true essence of the minimalist movement, is to try and create a game where if you wanted one game in your life, perhaps this was it. And so anyway, long story short, yeah, we developed this game ourselves, and it launched just before Christmas into Nordstrom. It was huge. It sold out in 2 weeks. We're very, very lucky about that. And there's also I did bring one in here to show, because it's we also did just some an interesting kind of paper pulp packaging solution to try and again create the minimal carbon footprint. So, and people afterwards can have a look at that. It's but the detail and the effort we put into trying to make this product as perfect as possible, as designers do, is quite extreme. But anyway, that brings me to the end. I hope I've said something of some value to someone. Any questions?
Was there any other instances in which the whole experiment surprised you in how people used them or interacted with them?
Oh, yes. Actually, if you have a look at the majority of all those other products, if you were to see those products in the field, you'll see that people have. So the one I mentioned, it was like some kind of Mac, the Formac product. It was. I was speaking with a friend of mine, and he suddenly saw. He's like, "Oh, you designed that?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You can answer something for me." And I was like, "What is that?" He's like, "I've been in a running argument with our IT guy because it has these holes on it." He said the IT guy threads all the cables through all the holes. He thinks they're for cable management. He said, "Do you design it for cable management?" And of course, the answer is, "I don't know." You know, but and he was desperate for me to say no. It's just all aesthetics. You know, it's just making it. But the reality is that so there's that. But literally, if you go in and you have a look at any of these products anywhere, you'll find that those holes are being used in some shape or form.
What is the design process that you rely on the most? What is your process for your team? When you have a project or a brief, where do you start and where do you go?
When a project comes in, we have what I also should have mentioned, but a lot of these the people that are on that slide of people who work with us, they're not all industrial designers. We have a mixed group of business people, copywriters, social media people, etc. So there's a kind of interesting collection, and we have a policy which is that any project which comes in will go through. Everybody will all get together. The entire company gets together and will brainstorm on it for 2 or 3 days. It doesn't matter the size of the project. Every project gets that sort of a treatment or exposure because we think that we really want, and it's this idea which is that we don't want any product to leave the studio without having some real depth of thought. So we go through a process where we all come up with ideas, and it is simply a case, like I was saying about the fact that nobody has a title. It is simply a case of the best idea wins. There's nothing else to it. I don't mind if it's a designer that's been working with me for 8 years, or it's the person who just walked in. I don't even matter if it comes from one of the business people who doesn't know anything about, doesn't have an education in design. It doesn't matter. We just look for the biggest, the best, and the richest ideas, and then we go through a process of but we hit it pretty hard. And I think that people are writing in business now these ideas about creating these hundreds of ideas, but we do that thing, and I mean designers have been doing that since the beginning of time. But we apply that, and we go through a whole series of different exercises to keep the idea generation going, another one of the good ones, of course, is the 100 ideas in 100 minutes. I don't know if people have done that here. It's a really good one. But we have also some that we've cultivated ourselves, because of course after you've done maybe like 2 hours of brainstorming, sometimes it can get a little dry. And to do that for 3 days requires a certain like I say, a certain approach and some exercises that can keep on allowing you to dig deeper. So that's what we do. And then whoever had is most passionate about it or had that idea, they're the person who will spin off and develop it. So that's how it works. Because we really try very, very hard to kind of keep the passion flowing, and that hopefully kind of represents it in the final design.
Looking at the work that you did with Visio, can you talk about the process in creating a design language that's considered iconic? Because it seems like in electronics, the market is saturated with their own brands. Like you look at Samsung or Apple, and you definitely recognize it as an Apple or Samsung product. How did you go about overcoming these obstacles? People didn't say it. How did
to expand on that a little, I'll say that there's an element of me every time I write a proposal and someone asks us to design something, which is just utterly terrifying. And it's this idea, which is, it happened, the biggest case of it happened to me, I think, about 4 years ago when someone asked us to design a bicycle. And I thought, and so you're at that part of the process where they say, hey, Pip, can you design a bicycle for us? And I just write a proposal for, okay, this amount of, we're going to do this process, we're going through this amount of weeks. But the reality is I was sat there writing the proposal, and I thought to myself, people have been designing bicycles for, I don't know what, like 160 years. What on earth am I going to do to the bicycle? And it sometimes happens, like especially with, like, again, it happened with Vizio when they asked us to do TVs. You have that thought, which is like, what on earth can I do? And so, but if you have a process and you go, the thing that just shocks me every time when you do the when you get the right group of people together and you start to brainstorm and you apply design thinking, and we also have this written in my studio on the back wall in about 4 or 5 foot high letters are the words "assume nothing," and we have this idea, which is that we're not scared to ask any questions, which is that you have to as designers. Well, the course of why we are where we are right now is a whole series of decisions that have been made, and they're forks in the road as you travel through that route. So what we try to do is we try to go back and we revisit those forks, and we ask ourselves the question: what if we were to travel down the other road, or maybe a completely different road? And sometimes you'll find that the reason why a decision was made at that fork over the other decision may have been that the technology wasn't available. But now the technology might be available. So when you kind of go back and you're like, well, now it is available, you can then shoot off in a different direction. So the crazy thing is that it's just truly petrifying when you write that proposal and you think, how on earth am I going to do? There's been some great minds who've worked on this up to now. How on earth am I going to do something different or innovative? But the reality is, again, like if you go through the right process and you go back and you question and you don't assume anything, quite easily and quite quickly, you suddenly find yourselves, and it happens, you get that kind of eureka moment where you suddenly look at your design and you're like, hold on a second, why has no one done this? This is obvious. And then there's this moment when you suddenly have to go on the internet and you type it in and you can't find anyone that's done it, and you're like, I don't understand that. But then you found an innovation, and that's where patents are. So long-winded way of talking about when it came to Vizio. So Vizio approached us. The history of that particular project was that the company had been kind of sourcing TVs and selling the original models they were kind of selling overstocked or last year's models a lot less expensive through Costco, and they realized they were getting to a scalable point where they were becoming competitive to some of the bigger manufacturers like Samsung, LG, etc. And so they realized that they couldn't just be asking these vendors to just be supplying their TVs and just sticking the Vizio logo. They had to bring some identity to it. So they approached us with this problem. They said, "Hey, Pip, we have all of these TVs. We need to create a language." And the thing that we identified was that exactly this, which is that as soon as it was very simple, which is that we realized that with the trends the way they were going, bezels were getting on. And again, this was we started working with them and did the original first M series and E series. I'd say it was like 6 years ago when they first did this. The bezels, we could clearly see that the bezels on displays were getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's just natural that they're just going to disappear after time. And the problem there is that where on earth are you going to put your brand? And everyone else was just like screen printing the brands onto the. So we had this idea, well, perhaps we need to just move the brand off the bezel, and so that led to us doing this tab, the original tab on the Vizio TVs. And the other thing we tried to do there was that the problem was that when you walk into Best Buy and you look at the wall of TVs, if you're at some distance, you just cannot tell. I can't tell one TV from another, but you can tell Vizio TVs because we'd have this tab which just break the silhouette of the display. And so we're just, from that point onwards, we now had something identifiable, but it just came from just a simple series of thoughts of like, bezels are getting thinner, and where on earth are you going to put the logo? And then it started us on a kind of a different trajectory. And then we applied that to a design language, which we then applied to a whole bunch of products and different solutions. So that's what we did with Visio.